Hi. So I spent the summer reading the book Students with Interrupted Formal Education, and I'm going to share a little bit about the book with you and just make a short summary of the 5 chapters that are in this book. Let's begin with Chapter 1. If you are new to ELD or ESL, SIFE stands for Students with Interrupted Formal Education. It, it is estimated that about 10 to 20% of the newcomer EL population are SIFE. SIFE students come from all over the world for many reasons, such as natural disasters, wars, political reasons, or looking for a better life. These students have significant gaps in their education and first language literacy due to difficulty accessing the school, limited transportation options, natural disasters, violence, poorly trained teachers, and other reasons. SIFE students are different from other newcomers because they develop no or low literacy skills in their first language. Some students don't know how to read or write, don't have alphabet knowledge, or lack basic math skills, making it more difficult for them to make connections when learning English and the grade level content. According to the book, in 2015, the dropout rate for SIFE students was 70%. If these students arrive straight to high school, they face even more challenges, since they have less time to learn English, develop literacy, and meet the required state standards in order to graduate. You might be wondering how to support secondary SIFE students. Here are some suggestions from the book. Build a safe learning environment to meet their needs, like linguistic, cultural, social, and emotional. Form newcomer centers to help them transition. Provide options for reaching graduation and align the school programs with higher and adult education. And connect students and families with community resources. So, what about elementary SIFE students? Here are some support suggested by the authors. Introduce new vocabulary and concepts by using TPR, visuals, and realia. Pair students up with a buddy. Use repetition, introduce routines, and be patient. Some students will need to learn how to act in a school setting and how to follow directions since they may not have attended school before or in several years. Be patient as your student learns routines and expectations. Be mindful when teaching phonics, sounds, letters, and word building skills. You can learn how English and your students' first language have similar sounds, letters, or words to help them make connections and learn about which sounds might be new or difficult for them depending on their first language. Another suggestion in the book that applies to all students, especially SIFE students, is to meet with a family and gather some information. The book has an excellent form on page 7 with questions about the student's previous educational background, such as how many years they have attended school in their country, what other countries have they attended school, do they have school records, are they literate in their first language, have they lived in a refugee camp, and other similar questions. The book suggests using a form like this because often students who come from refugee camps or escaping their country don't have their educational documents. So asking them and their family members about their previous schooling experiences is helpful to know how to best support them. Also, by doing this, um, we are meeting the family and starting to build a trusting relationship with them. Let's go to chapter 2. Chapter 2 explains that Latinos, people from Latin America who speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Creole, are the largest linguistic minority in the United States. So, this chapter is focused on Latinos with interrupted education. The largest group of Latinos in the U.S. are from Mexico, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, Cuba, Guatemala, and Colombia. This chapter describes some reasons that contribute to having interrupted education by country. Some common factors across the countries mentioned in the chapter were poverty educational system in their home countries. For example, in Mexico, ninth grade marks the end of compulsory education. This may cause confusion in students coming to the US since they might think they don't need to enroll in US schools after ninth grade. Another example from the book mentioned that the Dominican Republic has overcrowded classrooms and an outdated curriculum, among other reasons for which students may drop out or experience gaps in their education. And another reason was that students support their families. Many children or teens in these countries work to help support their families. This chapter also discusses some of the challenges that these students might face, such as employment issues, trauma, high dropout rates, and fear of having a family deported. This is once they are here in the US. This chapter also talked about unaccompanied minors. As of 2024, there are approximately 67,000 unaccompanied minors in the United States who have been released to sponsors. And this is only the ones who were processed and cared for by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So that's a high number. In this chapter, the authors mention that many of these unaccompanied minors are also SIFE students. They will also be the ones to pay close attention to regarding any trauma related responses. They might have experienced traumatic events back in their countries and or while crossing the border. They may have gone through family separation or um, family reunification issues. They may need support from school counselors and the psychologist. So once you identify a student as life, this is something to look out for and finding ways to support them. Some suggestions given by this chapter were to build on educational background that students come with, so their background knowledge, use specialized curriculum for SIFE to target the literacy gaps, bring culture into the lessons to make learning relevant for them, and use code switching. Code switching is when two or more languages are used in the classroom, like in a conversation, for example. Chapter 3 focuses on refugees. It begins by sharing some data about countries that take in the most refugees and describes the resettlement process in the US. There are agencies that support refugee families as they move and transition to their new lives. One interesting fact mentioned in this chapter is that adults in the family take a cultural orientation, like a training, to learn about the culture in the new country. It sounds like it is a helpful training, but long and tedious process. This chapter also describes how refugee camps work and why some children who live in these camps may experience interruptions in their education. For example, it mentions that going to school might be dangerous, the class sizes are really large, and the classes might be outside. So, for these and other reasons described in the book, some students and families may not send their children to school when they are in a refugee camp. The book also explains um, that some reactions related to trauma, like difficulty controlling emotions, depressions, headaches, and stomach aches, and impulsive behaviors, might come out inside students who were refugees. The chapter ends by describing the top refugee groups in the United States by giving some historical background, explaining the good things about their school systems, and listing some challenges that each of the groups might face. This chapter was my favorite, and it was really interesting, and it gave me new insights on refugee students. So if you're going to read one chapter in this book, just read this one. Chapter 4 is about providing social and emotional support to SIFE students. It starts by saying that due to the circumstances SIFE students might have faced back in their countries, they may experience stress, and that can affect their cognitive, social, emotional, and first and second language development. So it is important that we as teachers help them learn how to be resilient. One of the stressors in this chapter is culture shock. The book describes the four phases of culture shock and then lists some symptoms like physical and emotional, for example, frequent illnesses, biting nails, anxiety, frustrations, and feelings of helplessness. Some things that we can do to support our SIFE students are to allow them to work in groups, provide hands-on learning opportunities, use language and content objectives, activate background knowledge before each lesson, and provide a print-rich environment. Chapter 4 has approaches to building resilience. The I have, I am, I can approach. And the other one is reading and writing migration narratives. Let's start with the first one. So, for I have, students list people or things that they have in their lives that can support them in a positive way. So, they make a little chart and they can list their parents, grandparents, teachers, churches. So, it is divided by personal in the school setting and in the community. For the I am, students need to think of who they are, what they have learned, and similar questions. And again, they do a little chart. And for I can, they think about things that they can do now and things that they can accomplish in a later time, and some things like a goal, what they can work towards. The next one, the reading and writing migration narratives. The book provides a table with several migration narrative resources, and migration narratives empower students while they learn literacy skills. Some resources to support students while working on migration narratives are picture books, wordless books, and read alouds. This activity can be especially helpful to secondary SIFE students because they can relate to other um, stories about students or families migrating. The book suggests a lot of supports like organizers and has a great list of resources that teachers can use to do this activity. Chapter 5 talked about school supports for SIFE students. Some academic supports are having newcomer programs, offering a specialized curriculum for SIFE that focuses on literacy and language development, that provides extended learning opportunities and connects families to community resources, and also develops the first language literacy. So these are some supports from this chapter. The chapter also suggests using picture books and wordless books and providing opportunities to do readers theater and using sequencing activities based on the picture and wordless books to build oral fluency. It also talks about the importance of using language and content goals in lessons and recommends the SIOP method as a good choice to learn how to plan lessons using both of these goals. It ends by suggesting community resources and programs like family literacy programs and Saturday school. Finally, Appendix B has a list of recommended books to use with SIFE students by topic, such as alphabet books, numbers, adjustment to school, and counting. So it's a great list to look at. I recommend the book to any teacher who wants to learn more about SIFE students and wants some strategies and resources for them. It is an easy read and it has lots of great information. So I hope you can get your copy and read your book.